select recording, which I've now done. So welcome everyone to our weekly call, live from well, I say the centre of Prague. That's not strictly true. The Prague suburbs will be closer to it. In case you joined after I mentioned it earlier, I'm at the, well, it was OARC meeting on Saturday and Sunday. That's morphed into the RIPE meeting today in the same venue. And the shadowy figure to my side is John Todd, who's also attending the same two meetings, and it's entirely possible one or two others may sort of come in partway through. So apologies in advance if that happens and just interrupts the flow. Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, which I've done, so you should, I hope, be able to see that clearly. Just adjust the camera slightly. Okay, so, well, firstly, congratulations for passing the initiative test of coping with the time change, especially if you're joining from the US, as I think your time change is next weekend. So we've got this slightly awkward week where we're out of sync by an extra hour. Just makes things slightly harder. Okay, just to remind you, the purpose of the call, or the main focus of the call this week, we're going to be talking about the agenda for the forthcoming IETF meeting. So I'm going to run through the agenda and call out some things that caught my eye on the agenda. But as I'm running through, if anyone wishes to highlight anything else, please do so. Otherwise, you'll get bored, I suspect, listening to me just talking continuously for a while, because it's a big agenda. But the point is to try and sort of signpost the things of interest that I think are of interest on the agenda, because certainly it's relatively complex as agendas go, can be somewhat intimidating for those new or relatively new to the IETF meetings. So just a reminder, first, the meeting itself starts this coming Saturday with a hackathon, which runs over the weekend, Saturday and Sunday. Then the meeting proper effectively starts on the Monday, albeit there's a welcome reception on the Sunday night. But the actual main sessions begin on the Monday and run through to Friday afternoon. It's in the Dublin Convention Centre, which is just outside the centre of Dublin. When I sort of checked yesterday, there were just over 1,250 people had registered, of which 319, to be precise, were planning to attend remotely at that point. So around 900 odd planning to attend in person. You can still register to attend either in person or remote. You've obviously now missed the super early and early bird rates, and we're now on the standard rates, although fee waivers are readily available for people that are attending remotely. So they're available without the need to justify why you need a fee waiver. So if the cost of remote attendance is a barrier, so I think it's a few $100s now. So it's a non-trivial amount to cover the cost of the remote participation. And I should say the IETF meetings use a customized version of Meet Echo, which in my opinion is an excellent remote attendance tool. So it is a good remote experience, albeit you don't get the in the corridor conversations and the social aspects, but you do get good participation interactively, at least. Okay, onto the meat then. So as I said, the hackathon starts or runs over the weekend, and the results of the hackathon are delivered on the Sunday afternoon between 2 and 4 p.m. That's on the 3rd of November. Also on the 3rd, there is some content every Sunday between 10 and 12. The Internet Engineering and Planning Group, IEPG, meets at IETF meetings and typically covers more operationally sort of relevant things. Although the examples I've given are perhaps maybe poor ones, but talks about things like operational issues, deployment issues, etc. At the last meeting, I think we had discussion about some of the challenges of deep space networks, including 2-year timeouts and IP over Bluetooth. But the actual content varies just depending on what proposals are put forward for presentations. So if you're around on the Sunday, other than the hackathon, you've also got the option of the IEPG. If you're new to the IETF community, we define new as typically up to 5 meetings worth of attendance, but there isn't a sort of any policing of that. Then there is a quick connections event between 4 and 5 p.m. on Sunday. There's no cost to attend that I'm aware of, but you do need to pre-register. So bear that in mind if you plan to go to that. And then between 5 and 8 p.m, there's a welcome reception on the Sunday evening. It is a cash bar. There isn't a sponsor for the welcome reception this time round, so bear that in mind. And also between 6 and 8 p.m. on Sunday, there's the Hot RFC Lightning Talks, which basically you can cover pretty much anything you like, but you have to stick to a maximum of, I think it's 4 minutes. So it can be quite eclectic subject matter. And if you're not presenting it, it's quite a good way of finding out what's on people's minds, some of which might signpost stuff that's coming up later in the week. Other things might just be topics that people are thinking about. They want to find out if anyone else shares that interest. So a good thing to perhaps sit in on with a bottle of beer in your hand, for example, or other refreshments are available. Okay, digging right in to the agenda then. And what I'm going to do, if you go onto the website, you'll see the agenda. So I've done some screen grabs, and I'm just going to highlight different things that have caught my eye, and then where possible, give you some understanding as to why that may be. But I'll do it briefly, otherwise we could take several hours. And you can obviously click on these to get more detail at your leisure. In most cases, I'll reference things that are on the working group session agendas, but there are 2 or 3 examples where, even though it's past the deadline, the agendas aren't available yet. So apologies in advance if I'm just suggesting it might be of interest without being able to tell you precisely why at this stage. So you'll see on the Monday morning, the registration desk is open from 8:30. I think it's also open through the weekend if you're there earlier. The first session starts at 9:30 on the Monday, and the format's going to be the same all through the week. So session 1, as you can see, is 2 hours long. And there are 8 parallel tracks running with a range of different topics. The one that I'm going to call out is DNS delegation, which is basically a way of adding more flexibility to the DNS protocol, making it more future-proof in some aspects. I'll explain, well, I'll give you more idea what's on the agenda in a second. And then after lunch, so it's 9:30 to 11:30, then there's an hour and a half break to facilitate some of that sort of corridor conversation, and also some of the other social activities. Then from 1 till 3, session 2 takes place. And there are two things that caught my eye there: the moderation procedures, or ModPod, and also high performance wide area network. And you'll see that's highlighted towards the bottom of the screen as a BOF, or birds of a feather session. So that's a topic which is being almost tested with the community to see whether there's sufficient interest and depth to warrant work on some standards formation. And then just to add a little bit more detail to these, and as I said, all of this information is available on the website by clicking on the various sessions. So you'll see on the left-hand side of the screen, I've listed the agenda, or the more interesting agenda topics that are part of the DNS delegation, or DELEG working group session. So it's looking at the requirements draft, because this is a new topic. The draft that the working group is going to work on hasn't been completely finalised yet. I think the chairs are hoping to get that now done quite soon and have it formalised. And with that in mind, people are already working on meeting some of those requirements, albeit there isn't a formal requirement yet. So you can see some of the various, several of the various other presentations beyond the requirements draft. The moderation procedures, when I looked yesterday, didn't have a published agenda, but it's basically working to revise some of the moderation processes and procedures used by the IETF community, whether that's for moderating email, I suspect for sort of moderating behaviour in the meetings, whether that's online or in person, and so on. So I think it's a while since those were looked at. It was discussed at the last meeting in Vancouver, and it was agreed that that needed to be updated. And then high performance wide area network, as I said, it's a birds of a feather topic, so it's a new topic that's currently being explored. I think what people have in mind as an example in terms of high performance wide area network is the sort of data volumes from somewhere like CERN, but how to support those on a wide area as opposed to a local area network. So it's looking at what the issues are that come out of that, and how to run those over public infrastructure. What challenges does it throw up? What technical problems need to be solved, and so on. So that's being introduced for the first time in Dublin. Absolutely no idea how that's going to land, whether there's going to be sufficient interest. Gut feel probably there will be, but it's a topic I suspect will probably come back for at least another meeting before agreements reach whether it warrants a working group. I'm just going to plough on, by the way, unless anyone interrupts me by either raising a virtual hand or unmuting and saying something. So if you want to interrupt, if you think I've missed anything, either in any of the stuff I've said or indeed any of the sessions I'm not highlighting, then it's absolutely fine to say pop something in the chat and I'll see that, or unmute and sort of shout out, and we can sort of pick up the point as appropriate. That said, the other sessions I wanted to highlight, actually I realised one I've missed the highlight, which is session 3. Monday session 3, there's only one track. So this is an exception through the week where it's an experiment that is been road tested the last 2 meetings. This will be the 3rd and final time as an experiment, is the IETF-wide dispatch session between 3:30 and 5 on Monday. There's no competing sessions with that, and that's an opportunity for anyone that believes there's subject matter that could be looked at by the IETF. They can pitch that to the community and get a decision. Does it belong with the IETF, and if so, where? Or does additional work need to be done first, or would it be better done somewhere else? So historically, we've had numerous different subject-specific dispatched sessions. So an experiment for the last 2 meetings, culminating in this one, is to do it in one place so that you can get an answer from the entire community rather than having to try the different subject areas one after another. Yeah, that should have been highlighted. Apologies, I missed that. Also, in the afternoon, session 4, we've got the IRTF, that's the Internet Research Task Force, the research side of the House. It's got an open meeting. The DNS Ops group has got the first of its 2 meetings through the week as well. And then in the evening, for new participants, which you'll recall, people have been up to 5 times, but it's not policed. There's a new participants dinner, so basically an opportunity to socialise with other new participants. It's off-site somewhere, I can't remember where. You do need to pre-register, and there's a $15 fee towards the cost of the dinner, but pretty good value since you get a dinner out of that. So if you're a new participant attending in person, then that's definitely worth doing if you've not done it previously. And just briefly looking at some of the topics, and there's you'll see on the left-hand side I've listed all the things which are currently on the agenda for the all dispatch session. There's quite a few. The intent is, or certainly previously, I think we're allowed up to 15 minutes. I suspect it's going to be less than that this time, otherwise we will time out quite heavily. You'll see there's a bunch of stuff which is being pitched to the community, and if it's chaired well, we shouldn't really get into the nitty-gritty of what each of those things are, except to understand it sufficiently to work out, does it belong somewhere in the ITF, and if so, where? And then, if appropriate, it's dispatched to that particular area to be sort of picked up properly. Equally, the decision might be there's no interest, or it doesn't belong here, or whatever. So there's a range of outcomes, but we shouldn't get into too much detail about the different the specifics of these different topics, just to get enough understanding to understand sort of what it is and where it might belong. So that's generally quite interesting, actually. Yeah, it's quite wide-ranging. Some of the stuff is quite processy, and then there's quite a lot of more normal material there, as you can see if you just scan down the list of topics. Sort of by contrast, the IRTF Open, that's got it's only got 2 topics being presented. They're both prize-winning talks. Effectively, the prize partly being that the authors get to present at the ITF. I think they get funding to come as well, as far as I know. So you'll see they're 2 quite sort of different things. One is exploring the benefits of carbon-aware routing, and the second, how the Great Firewall of China detects and blocks fully encrypted traffic. One on green stuff, one on censorship. They're typically about half an hour long, the presentations, usually with a chance to ask questions of the authors. So that's certainly well worth attending if you're able to. And then the last one on the slide, it's not an error on the display. DNS Ops, I always struggle with how best to summarize the working group, and that's not a criticism of the working group. It's simply that it's the sort of operationally focused DNS working group, as the name implies. I'm just reordering the title words. It covers such a diverse range of things, and there are so many of them. So I think the first slot is 2 hours, and there's a second slot later in the week. It was just impossible to summarize in a few bullet points on the screen. But if you have an interest in the DNS protocol, then that's definitely the place to be, both this session and the one that will come up later. So the agenda does exist. It's just I struggle with this every meeting, how best to encapsulate the interesting bits. So I decided rather than not to do it justice, I won't try. I don't know if any of the co-chairs are on the call because I can't see the participant list on my small screen. But if anyone is and wants to call out anything particularly interesting, feel free to either unmute and say something or pop it in the chat if that's easier, if you are on the call. No one's immediately unmuted, so either you're not or you might be typing. So if you, as I say, if there's anything you think is especially worth highlighting, do pop it in there and I'll call it out. If not, please look on the website and you'll get a better understanding of that. You'll probably see why that's a challenge to try and summarize in a handful of bullet points. Okay, I'm going to sort of carry on. So moving on to Tuesday, and it's the same structure for almost every day of the week. So a number of sessions, a number of slots rather, with 8 parallel tracks, so running throughout. The one I've called out is another BOF, digital emblems. It's the second time this topic's appeared. It appeared for the first time in Vancouver. So you can cover the same topic, I think technically up to 3 times in the ITF procedures before deciding whether to make it a working group or drop it. And this is, at its really simplest, an attempt to give the digital equivalent of assigning, say, a Red Cross site, just marking it digitally, so that in the event of cyber warfare, etc., that certain sites are left untargeted. It has other applications as well, but it's to attach that sort of marking to those sorts of sites. So that's really if you like, the sort of problem space that the BOF is looking at. And then after lunch on Tuesday, you'll see in session 2, I've highlighted 2 things. One is the IAB open meeting. That's the Internet Architecture Board, which is meant to be the more forward-thinking sort of leadership team within the ITF community, thinking about sort of future problems that we need to solve with standards. I'll come back to that in a second. And also in that same time slot, the SPICE working group, Secure Patterns for Internet Credentials. That's a way of having a protocol to share certain the credentials about myself without showing them all. So, for example, having a way to validate that I am indeed over 18, but without needing to tell you my date of birth or my address or anything. But to do that in a secure way, but a standardized way. That's also meeting in that time slot. And in terms of the subject matter there, I'm not going to go through all of these, probably the ones I just call out from the IAB Open session. There's an update on a workshop that was recently run under the auspices of the IAB, the NEMOPS workshop. I think that's a Future Network Management Operations, remember the acronym correctly, workshop. And also one that's just been held, an AI control workshop. There's a summary being delivered in the IAB open session, and also there's a side meeting, which I'll come back to in a bit. And then the third topic I've highlighted is the Global Digital Compact. There's a 15-minute presentation on that. So that's very much more in the policy space, which is an unusual thing to be covered in an ITF meeting, but someone from the Internet Society is addressing that. I'm not going to go through all the other things on there. You can sort of, and I will share these slides afterwards. So if there's anything on here that's useful, you can sort of skim back through that at your leisure. But and as I say, all of the detail is also on the ITF meeting website. Okay, carrying on Tuesday, the session 3 between 3 and 4 p.m. the adaptive DNS discovery working group is meeting. So that's one that I've sort of highlighted. And then between 4:30 and 5:30, session 4, the Privacy Enhancements and Assessments Research Group is meeting. So those two are the ones you'll probably find me at. The ADD one first, apart from stuff the working group's been looking at for a while, and this is basically the sort of discovery for encrypted DNS resolvers, amongst other things. The co-chairs have been keen to foster a discussion around sort of where and the direction of travel of architectural sort of decision making, whether the current sort of direction of travel is the right one on security decisions, which is very much endpoint centric, whether there's a role for the network in this space. So that's an issue I think they're keen to discuss. So that's on the agenda for the ADD meeting. Whereas the PEARG research group, two topics, one on router-induced censorship, and one on just on privacy, effectively. So those are two reasonably chunky presentations with a time for a short amount of discussion on each one, as opposed to the more sort of traditional working group. But then it's a research group, so that's fine. So it's more content-led on the research group side.
I'll make a quick comment on this one because one of my drafts is in this. There's also going to be work in the hackathon on the EDSR draft. That's Tommy Jensen's going to be heading that up. I'm not going to be at the ITF, but if you have an interest in how encrypted DNS servers can be shifted from, so clients can move between them. Yeah, so that's feel free to attend this session, and also, as I said, there will be work at the hackathon, hopefully getting some client or at least some proof of concept work done on that and showing it to and then talking about it at this session.
Oh, okay, I didn't know that. That's good stuff. And I have to say, DELEG, which I mentioned one of the first sessions in the week, that was initiated as a discussion in one of the recent hackathons. So there's a fine tradition of hackathons ultimately leading to new working groups. So who knows? Okay, carry on. Tuesday culminates in session 5, so it's going to be one of the longer days through the week, between 6 and 7. And again, I've sort of called out one thing there, which is the Oblivious HTTP Application Intermediation Working Group, or OI. I'll come back to OI in a moment. And then on the Wednesday, we got a RESTful Provisioning Protocol, BOF, so it's a new topic being opened up, and also DOLT, the Detecting Unwanted Location Trackers working group, which that as a topic was a BOF only a couple of meetings ago. Looking at the subject matter in those, the OHI working group, they've only got one presentation on chunked Oblivious HTTP. I'm pretty sure they had a presentation on that topic at the last meeting as well. So which I didn't make. So I'm not sure how much progression there is in the working group with one presentation, which has come back again. No doubt it's changed the content of the presentation, but I'm just a bit surprised that it's essentially the same agenda. But as I say, I wasn't able to make the last one, so that's possibly an unfair observation. The RESTful Provisioning Protocol, that's really looking at the EPP protocol, which is much more used in the sort of registrar space, and it's sort of just trying to understand whether there's a need for something to replace that, I believe, and it's really just working through what's the rationale for this and what the requirements may be. It's a BOF, as I say, so that's quite a reasonable approach that to understand the problem space and decide whether there's a need there. And then DOLT, which is all about detecting unwanted physical location trackers, so air tags or similar, where they've been perhaps planted on you by a partner that's perhaps domineering and wanting to track your every movement. So I know there's been some work on collaboration to find a hardware independent way of doing that, or vendor agnostic way of doing that. And that's been sort of making progress over the last few meetings. So that's really the subject for that session. A reminder, again, if everyone's got anything you want to jump in with, feel free. Otherwise, I will continue remorselessly. Okay, so also on Wednesday, we've got the decentralization of the Internet Research Group. So that's really looking at the whole centralization, consolidation sort of challenge, and whether we're losing the basics or ethos, the design requirement of the internet as everything consolidates onto a handful of companies doing everything largely. And then between 3 and 4:30, session 3, the mask working group. And then finally, at the end of the Wednesday, as always happens between 5 and 7 p.m, we've got the IETF plenary. The DIN-RG, so the decentralization research group, there's no agenda for that yet, so I can't tell you the specifics of what's on there. It's usually a good session to go to. Obviously, it's more policy, almost orientated. So I always find that an interesting discussion, but that's a leap of faith at the moment, as the agenda wasn't up yesterday evening when I put these slides together. The mask session, the agenda is there. If I'm honest, I don't normally go to that, but I put it on my slides because normally when we do this call, somebody mentions the working group, so I thought I'd rather preempt that and put it on there anyway. Yeah, that's what it's covering, but I haven't been following it the last few meetings, so I can't really comment on it anymore. But yeah, I think it's making good progress. It is being deployed, so it's a thing anyway. And then the plenary will follow its normal format for those of you that are familiar with the IETF structure. A couple of perhaps things just to highlight, which is the 2 awards towards the start. So the Jonathan Postel Service Award and the ITOGEN Service Award, both been presented at the start of the plenary. And then there's a whole series of presentations by the different parts of the sort of leadership, followed by open mics with all of them. And usually with the open mics, there's a slightly awkward silence at the start, and then the logjam breaks, and there's a whole slew of people approach the mic with thorny issues that they want to raise. I'm sure that will be true of this one, because it has been of all of the recent ones. Okay, moving into Thursday, we've got the MIMI, More Instant Messaging working group, which has got 2 meetings, one in session 1 on Thursday, and if you look down to the middle of the slide, a second one in session 2. They generally have 2 sessions during the IETF meeting, but they're normally at different days of the week, so this is probably easier for people that are going to them, that it'll be fresh in their minds when they go to part 2. Also, though, you'll see competing for my attention and probably winning my attention will be the standard communication with network elements, or SCONE working group in Thursday session 1, and then the deep space BOF in session 2, and then since the IETF is, in my view, has got a lot of room for improvement on diversity of gender and a whole range of other dimensions. The sisters group are meeting on Thursday lunchtime. I think they also a meeting earlier in the week. I forgot to highlight that. So they usually meet twice, once at the start of the meeting and once slightly later on. So I think that's open for anyone to attend, but it's principally for female or non-binary participants. I'm saying that's I'm slightly shaky because I've never actually been to it, but it always gets good feedback from those that go. With regards the agenda content, despite having 2 agenda slots, Mimi doesn't have a lot on the agenda at the moment, just got something on discovery requirements with an indication from the chairs that if nothing else is added, then they'll drop, I think, the first of the 2 slots. So don't be surprised unless something else is added soon, if that disappears. Scone, on the other hand, has got quite a few things on the agenda, sort of reviewing the whole proposal, then looking at the work and next steps. That's partly because there was a lot of disagreement at the working group at the last meeting, whether it was trying to solve the right problem or not. And the problem it's trying to solve is a mechanism that networks could communicate to applications that they had some constraints. And the easy example is a mobile network telling, say, a video application that it's got limited bandwidth. With no obligation on the application to act on that information, but it might choose to act because it might perform better if it manages its bandwidth rather than buffering or whatever happens if it doesn't act. Anyway, there's quite a lot of discussion last meeting whether the use case that it was focused on was too constrained. And I know that's continued on the list. I think that is likely to continue into this meeting, not least of which because whilst not all working groups have managed to get agendas published yet, this is version 7 of the Scone working group agenda. So they've obviously had quite a lot of iterations of what should go on it. And then I think this is the last of the BOFs, the deep space BOF, looking on the right-hand side of the slide, is pretty much as described by the title, looking at the problem of a network operating in space. Not so much the physical challenges of that, although those are quite significant, but more things like the timeouts. That sort of thing, and what implications that has for an IP network, for example. Although I think they're trying to look beyond just IP, judging from a scan of some of the mailing list on that. So some of them are very IP centric. Others are saying, well, that's maybe too narrow, and they should be more ambitious than that. So that's clearly going to be part of the discussion to shape the problem that they think they should be trying to solve. Okay, not too much left to go now. I've sort of tagged in session 3 post-quantum use in protocols, mainly because there's several post-quantum sessions, and I felt it would be churlish not to highlight at least one of them. It's obviously a topic that's commanding some attention at the moment. There's quite a lot of discussion, for example, about post-quantum cryptography in DNSSEC, to name but one area. Some suggestions in the press a couple of weeks ago that post-quantum computing had cracked the RSA encryption, or one of the one variant of it. Although I think that was challenged a bit, and the suggestion was it was somewhat overstated, but nevertheless, depending on who you believe, we've got less than 10 years to solve this and have cryptography that is quantum computing proof before the quantum computing is sufficiently powerful enough to crack the existing cryptography. So there's several of these. I picked out that one. It's sort of random because there was nothing else that caught my eye in session 3 on Thursday. And then sort of part 2 of DNS Ops meets also on Thursday later on. And then there's a new participants social hour, which I don't think you have to pre-register for. That'll be sort of early on the Thursday evening. There's a bit more detail on the post-quantum working group. As I say, there are several of those, so you can look at that at your leisure. And DNS Ops, and my earlier comments still apply in terms of yeah, it's an interesting one, but there's too much to easily summarize. And then just on the home straight on Friday, we've got a research group, the Research and Analysis of Standard Setting Processes research group. And then the TLS, Transport Layer Security working group, early in the afternoon. Put some details on each of those. So a number of presentations for the RASP research group. It's a research group, so it's rather more deeply at the whole sort of standards process, how it works in different areas. So for those of us with interest on the process side, that's a good thing to do. By contrast, the TLS working group will be very much focused on various issues. The one I've highlighted, they want to set up a small expert group to assess new cryptography proposals and decide whether they warrant a need to have proper formal expert analysis to see if they're robust enough. There's been a lot of disagreement within the TLS working group whether that's the right approach, and that debate has been continuing on the mailing list and will certainly continue in this working group, with an alternative proposal being on the agenda, as well as the chairs wanted to summarise where the discussions got to with the existing proposal. And then there's a bunch of other stuff as well. But I think that could be, well, if it's anything like last time, there'll be a fair amount of disagreement as to the approach. Be interested to see whether consensus is ultimately reached. And then finally, on Friday, we've got the Human Rights Protocol Considerations Research Group. And then you'll see the end of the evening is sort of 5:15 to 6:15, a farewell reception, which usually does include free beer as an incentive to stay to the end of the meeting. Unfortunately, there's no agenda yet published for the HRPC research group, and there obviously isn't an agenda for the farewell reception other than to socialise and drink beer. So that's all of that. I'm not going to go through these because it'd take too long. I just wanted to highlight this. A lot of interesting side meetings also taking place in parallel with all of those sessions that I've just mentioned. As I said earlier, I'll share the slides post-meeting. I just sort of scroll through them here, but there's quite a lot of interesting stuff, arguably more so than there often is in meetings where the sort of variety of the side meetings varies widely. It's sort of first come, first served. There's definitely some topics there worthy of your attention, but to a large part, they're competing with the main sessions. So whether you have time to fit any of those in as well, I'll leave as an exercise for the reader, but it's definitely worth looking at the list. And I've only cherry-picked the ones that looked interesting to me, by the way. There's a lot more that I've pulled out. Okay, just conscious of the time, let me just stop there for a moment and ask, since no, I haven't seen any hands raised, nor have I seen anything in the chat. Does anyone have any questions or comments before I move on?
Do you do it? Amazing.
Very kind, John. Okay, let me just briefly move on then, just to sort of wrap up. I thought it would be churlish, as we are here in Prague, not to mention that there is a very interesting RIPE meeting taking place. We covered it on the call last week. We've not that long ago heard from Jeff Houston, presenting on whether infrastructure security is an internet market failure. Sadly, Jeff didn't do that one personally. He had a pre-recorded presentation, and then he joined live for Q&A because he managed to, if I heard rightly, come off his bike last week. So he's got some broken ribs and was advised, instructed by his doctor not to fly from Australia for the meeting. Unsurprisingly, it's probably not a good idea a week after you've broken your ribs to get on a 24-hour flight, I'm guessing, medically. And then again, there's various things. Those are the things we talked about on the call last week. So don't forget those if you have time this week. And there are other topics as well. Those are just some of the ones that caught my eye. There's also a DNS working group on Wednesday morning, which I haven't got on this slide. And then there's also a whole bunch of stuff that's happening in the news, which I won't go through in any great detail, just highlight a couple of things perhaps. So these are all in the weekly news headlines that would have been in your mailbox this morning. If you're not on the mailing list and want them, drop me an email and I'll add you to the mailing list. You'll see some stuff there about DNS is a very popular, if that's the right phrase, parameter that's used to con people out of their money or their data. As you can see, used by more than 90% of successful cyber attacks, which is not a good stat for the DNS community. That's nothing to be proud of. There's also a research paper on DoH, or DoH downgrades of DNS over HTTPS, which is due to be published at a conference in December. I don't think the paper's actually available. Sorry, the paper is available now, I think. Yeah, it's been presented in a few weeks' time, as you can see. And then just the third one there, Tor, the browser, had a new update with support for a number of things, including encrypted client hello. Just being added to it just to enhance its privacy capabilities. People on the call will be aware I have some skepticism about all of the properties of ECH, but probably it does fit well for the Tor browser. Simon, you raised your hand. Sorry. Did you want to jump in with something?
Sorry, a quick query, please. Does DOH downgrade, is that a comment on what DOH does, or is it a technical term?
I believe it's a comment on how you can the methods that you can disable by not responding appropriately. I think
with you,
yeah. Depending on how you respond and what the settings are in the software, you can fail hard, so you won't give a response to a query, or you can fail open, where if the server doesn't support DoH, or the resolve doesn't support DoH, then you could still give an answer. So yeah, it's an attack vector. Arguably, it's only if the software is written badly and doesn't specify how it wants to behave. Of course, a lot of browsers don't like a hard fail because that's a bad user experience, which is why they allegedly don't support DNSSEC, for example. Because of the bad user experience, but that's a whole other topic. So yeah, I think that's what it's about. Okay, there's probably nothing else on here worth calling out. I mean, they're interesting things, but just in the interest of time, probably just the one at the top of the screen there about since I mentioned encrypted client hello. The standard itself hasn't been finalized yet. It's still going through the ITF process, and simultaneously there are papers going through that support some of the ancillary functions, like how you communicate the key to the client software so that it works with the server. And that's essentially what that top thing is all about, so that the connection works. It needs to have the key to work. Yeah, other things I think are fairly self-explanatory. Yeah, more conferences. ICANN in Istanbul, and then we're not that far from the IGF in Riyadh as well. There wasn't so much sort of DNS related stuff that got more out this week, so and I won't go through that time-wise, but there are always other things happening. I will highlight if you want to, for example, comment on the renewal of the registry agreement for VeriSign. You've got until the 5th of November to do that. Should you have an opinion on that, I can want to hear from you. The various other dates coming up that you can read at your leisure. And then finally, we got some events. Well, obviously, right at the moment, ITF starting on Saturday. Also next week, if you're not at the ITF and you're in the UK, the UK's Internet Governance Forum, so the national version, is taking place on the 5th. You can join remotely as well, and so on. Okay, and then we won't have a call next week because many of us will be in Dublin, either in person or virtually. The following week, we'll do just a wrap up of some of the things that have come out of, I suspect, just OARC and RIPE, and then the week after, a few things that have come out of the ITF meeting. There may be a little bit of blurring around the edges of that. And then we'll continue with, we may have a panel discussion. I'm just trying to nudge the panelists about resolver discovery. It's roughly a year since we standardized on how to discover encrypted resolvers. So the plan is that we'll have some of the authors of the two drafts or the two standards to get together and just reflect on that 1 year out from the standard being established. Okay, and with 4 minutes to go, phew, got there. Right, so apologies for throwing a lot at you, but we do have, amazingly, 4 minutes left for any other business. Should anyone want to talk about anything else? Either John in the room with me or indeed anyone else that's online, should you wish to. And if you do, by the way, either raise your virtual hand or put something in the chat, whichever is easier. And I can see that Nigel has said that the UK IGF should be fun. We have a minister there in person, I think, from the way you worded it, Nigel, which is good to know. So disappointed I can't be there, but timing and all that. I'm guessing there might be another one fairly soon, because I gather that although we've got an IGF, sort of global IGF taking place in December, that the next one may take place as early as next June, possibly, because of some of the other sort of policy things that are happening at the moment.
Yet to be announced, Andrew, whether it's going to be in June next year, but if it's in June next year, it will be in Oslo.
Yes, I was going to say, in theory, there's one of two venues, Oslo or Moscow, but oddly, Moscow doesn't seem so popular amongst the international community as a venue for a conference just at the moment. So yeah, that seems like a sound choice if it is going to be Oslo. As I say, the rumour being middle of next year, which would be quite a good thing. Okay, last chance for any other business from anyone else? Not seeing anything in the chat. I can't see any hands raised. Hopefully I've not bored you too much. That was vaguely useful. I will share the slides, so you'll have the links, possibly not before tomorrow. We'll see how this evening goes. There is a social this evening, but you should get those tomorrow, plus a link to the recording, etc. So you can just play it back at your leisure if you want to refer back to stuff. And like I said, don't forget the website as well for the the main ITF site with all the details. So hope that was useful. Hopefully see some of you in person in Dublin, and others online on Meet Echo. Reminder, we won't have a call this time next week, but we will catch up in two weeks' time to start reflecting on this last tranche of various conferences. So have a great rest of the day, depending on what time zone you're in, and catch up in a couple of weeks' time. Bye, everyone.